Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. Really excited for today's show. We've got none other than Jeanette Friedrich on the line with us. So, Jeanette, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
And for everybody listening out there, Jeanette just recorded a podcast with me as a guest. Their podcast is ready to scale. And incidentally, I interviewed her partner in crime, we'll say, for lack of a better term. I'm not that creative. Saeed Mahmood a couple weeks ago, and his episode is out there as well. So, Jeanette, that said, welcome to the show.
Thanks again for having me. I'm really excited to be on. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Awesome. So do us a favor, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of weave a little bit of a tale and tell us how you got into multifamily.
Yeah, it's a very unique and interesting story, but I think something that probably some of your listeners, unfortunately, in some way, shape, or form, might be able to relate to.
Mhm,
I'm actually the first employee of Blue Lake. I'm the
mhm,
director of investor relations and marketing. And the way I ended up getting into real estate to begin with
mhm,
was through basically a lot of challenges and adversity. Basically, I thought that I was kind of like at the height of my career. I
mhm,
was a single mom. I had three daughters at home, 14, 12, and 10 years old.
mhm.
I'd been a single mother for many years already up until that point, and I was doing everything I could to build a career that could provide well for my family and that I could be proud of. And I thought I was doing pretty good. And then the music stopped. And my 14-year-old daughter actually got diagnosed with not just one, but believe it or not, two very serious autoimmune diseases in the
Ooh,
same week.
wow.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, in that moment, I realized that everything literally was about to change.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I knew that the magnitude and the severity of her illness was really going to put me into a very challenging position of figuring out how do I provide for my family while I also help my daughter navigate through a serious health crisis. And a lot of that was also in a hospital. And so it was like, what do I do? And so I resigned from my job at the
Mhm.
time that, again, I thought was actually kind of like the height of my career.
Yeah.
I was a global director of marketing for
Mhm.
a very well-funded startup company. And I saw a job for a part-time social
Mhm.
media specialist. And I said, well,
Nice.
I'm ridiculously overqualified, but I could do this with my
Yeah.
arms tied behind my back, and I could definitely do it remotely from a hospital. So, I applied
Yeah.
for that job. And even though it had to do with real estate, which I hated and was like gross, I applied anyway, and I got the job. And so I actually took the position because I just needed to find something that I could do from a hospital room. And this is before COVID, before there was a lot of remote jobs out
Mhm.
there that, paid ish enough, for a single mom to keep making
Yeah.
it. So it was really challenging, but it was funny because at the time, our CEO, Ellie Perlman, told me point blank when she interviewed me, I don't think I can afford you. And I said, well, that's great because I'm on clearance
Mhm.
because I wanted to make sure that my
Yeah.
daughter medical bills were covered. So I purposely was keeping us in the income guidelines for Medicaid in order
Mhm.
to make sure that my daughter didn't miss treatments or couldn't have medication or
Yeah.
any other type of challenges like that. So I had to make, a sacrifice that some families, with chronically ill children do and
Mhm.
some don't. I
Yeah.
had to also basically be willing to let our finances get destroyed too and just bring my income level way down from what we had been accustomed
Yeah.
to in order to do it. And so believe it or not, that is actually how I got into real estate
Yeah.
investing.
And you hated it.
I
So
hated it.
yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Do you still hate it? How about that question?
No, not at all. And so, it's so funny because trust
Mhm.
me, I have drank the Kool-Aid, I have bathed in the Kool-Aid, I sing the Kool-Aid, preach the
Mhm.
Kool-Aid. So, just to shed a little bit more color, this sounds insane. So, I mean, unless people know me or, have actually seen maybe bits and pieces of my journey through social
Mhm.
media, they might think that I'm like, just an unbelievable
Yeah.
liar because I mean, my story is so ridiculous. So, I was telling you about my daughter that got
Mhm.
sick.
Yep.
But before that, I have another daughter who was
Mhm.
born with a very rare syndrome that is actually causing her to go deaf. So I
Mm.
already had one kid that was technically considered special needs.
Yeah.
And so we were learning to kind of live life with a kid that slowly, but, has
Yep.
slowly been going deaf for a number of years. and then throw my sick kid on top of that. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What I realized was that the magnitude of my problems was big. I didn't
Mhm.
just need to worry about being a single mom. I didn't need to just worry about how I was going to handle my own retirement one day. I
Yeah.
was now looking at the potential challenge of needing to financially support or at least supplement two of my four children, maybe for their whole life.
Yeah.
This is a huge, huge goal. This is a huge,
Mhm.
huge problem. And I needed a huge solution for
Yeah.
a huge problem.
Yeah.
So that is where I completely had a change of heart and attitude towards real estate, because real estate really is one of the
Mhm.
very few avenues that anybody, regardless of your background, can actually use to begin to slowly but surely transform their financial, trajectory for their
Yeah.
family. It really is. There's not a lot of other places. I mean, you can play the stock market, but good luck. But real estate is something that is accessible to anybody.
Yeah.
And so I recognized that power, and I made a commitment to harness that as part of building out a solution.
Yeah. And I understand. I mean, I think I understand a little bit about where you're coming from. I actually have a younger sister with Turner syndrome and a younger
Hmm.
brother with cerebral palsy. One's late 30s, one's early 40s, and guess where they're living?
Yeah.
Still with mom and dad, so, and I mean, I realize, looking at my family situation, when my mom and dad are not able to take care of them, guess who in the family is best able to do it?
Yep.
Me. And the answer is because of real estate. So yeah, it is a very great place to be able to help other people, if that's what you're looking for. So, well, let's go, back into the real estate side. Let's talk about kind of transitioning into that first role, because you started out as a social media specialist, and now you're a little bit more than just a social media specialist. So let's talk about how that transition went, and we'll stop there, and I have more questions to ask later, but let's just go to there for now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. So, when I came in as her social media specialist, the first way that and I guess it might help shed a little bit of color. I had already been the
Hmm.
co-founder of my own company, my own startup
Okay.
company. So I already had experience building a startup company,
Yeah.
running a startup company. I actually did that while I was working full time in executive headhunting.
Hmm.
I had also, I had developed a lot of experience in business development, in marketing, and recruiting, and
Hmm.
operations, and building business. So I was way overqualified for my little social media specialist role. And Ellie's no fool. She recognized that. So,
Yeah.
and I also couldn't help myself. I'm kind of like, I'm not a part-time anything. Like if I'm
Uh-huh.
into something, I'm into something. So,
Yeah.
and honestly, I mean, I found it fun because when your life has a lot of challenges and chaos in it,
Hmm.
work can really be a haven for some stability in your life when everything else is kind of out
Yeah.
of control. So it was also kind of a nice escape for me in certain regards. So I really threw myself into it. And I thought, okay, how can I convince somebody as cynical as I was at first that
Hmm.
real estate investing is a valuable tool that they want to actually literally bring into their lifestyle and keep it going for a long
Yeah.
time, to bring about, the goals that they're trying to achieve
Hmm.
financially.
Yeah.
And so I thought about it, okay, from the most cynical standpoint, how can I do this? So of course, I didn't just start doing her social media posts
Hmm.
for her. I started designing an entire marketing strategy, which of
Yeah.
course, Ellie was more than happy to be like, thanks for
Yeah.
that extra work. You keep
You betcha.
going.
Yeah.
So I ended up designing an entire marketing strategy, and I began to execute that strategy, and we began to see really good results right away. Capital raising during that time really became a well-oiled machine. We were
Hmm.
not even looking for capital, we weren't chasing it. Investors were literally coming to us. And, so it was a very effective strategy that was working great at that time. In time, it worked so well that Ellie began to get overly inundated with taking calls with all the new investors
Oh yeah.
and managing the new investors that came in. So then I
That's a
started
great
helping.
problem to have, by the
Yeah,
way. I've got
I
so many
I
investors,
know.
and yeah.
I know. I know. I know. I hope we return to those days. We're not at those right now. I
No,
don't
no,
think
we're not.
anybody is. Yeah. But at that time, so then I actually started taking calls with the investors as well,
Mhm.
because she was just getting, inundated. And it was literally just she and I. And so I'm, the first employee
Mhm.
of the company at the time. So, by kind of almost accident, I just kind
Mhm.
of started moving to where I was basically overseeing both marketing and investor relations. And, it was fun. It was challenging. It was crazy. I was working honestly 7 days a week
Yeah.
because the workload was a lot. So eventually, we did bring in a social media specialist to work under me. So that way that could take some of the challenge, off of my plate. And then we also in time, began to scale out not only the portfolio, but, the team.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I moved from Texas to Boston to oversee
Mhm.
setting up our first brick and mortar headquarters.
Mhm.
And then we ended up setting up a second division in LA and ultimately ended up consolidating the two. So just recently, I moved from Boston to LA, which is now where we're headquartering the company.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Yeah. I mean, one way of, making a lot of money is to make yourself indispensable, and it sounds like that's exactly what you did. You saw a need, you jumped in it, you started doing it. And at that point, Ellie couldn't get rid of you if she wanted to, it's just one of these things like I
Hey,
need
I don't
her.
want to tempt that fate, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but in truth, yeah, I mean, I have been fortunate enough, to be able to have a boss that lets you do that, frankly,
Mm.
and I really did appreciate the flexibility. And it's very interesting because, I've obviously have worked other places before in my career. And, I had one boss that told me, he would rather have mediocre but very
Mhm.
consistent employees versus another boss that I had that loved shining stars and was all about just, hey, I'm just going to support my shining stars and let them do what they
Yeah.
do. And, for me personally, I think that it's a lot more gratifying to be working in a company where you're allowed to shine where you can
Yeah.
shine, to work on the things that you're passionate about, to have some crazy ideas and to be free to execute them and see how they
Mhm.
go. And,
Yeah.
so it works well for me. I like it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. I could go on a lot on that philosophy. That's one we've discussed a lot before is you find the really, 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 really good people and do everything you can. But yeah, mediocre people that are consistent. I don't know
Yeah.
how well that would work out,
I
I mean,
know. It was interesting. His philosophy was that
yeah,
shining stars burn out.
yeah,
And so that was his concern was that ultimately shining stars burn out and you just end up with more turnover. And so he found the value in mediocrity and consistency for, I guess, the long term. I don't
yeah,
really totally jive with that either. I think A players is
yeah.
extremely important, but hey, to each their own.
I mean, I'm trying in my head, and I was trying to think of a role where somebody who is consistently mediocre would, make a lot of sense. But I have a hard time. All right. But yeah, shining stars, shining stars. And then you just keep on fueling their fire so they don't burn out. So
Ideally, yes.
that's the goal. All right. So let's talk about when you started, raising money was a much different, thing than now. And, I started raising money for the first time in 2018 and it's much different now. So let's do this. Let's talk about what's working right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's a lot of factors that people need to understand
Mhm.
are at play right now. So, first of all, a lot of people are frankly sitting on the sidelines because
Yep.
there's way too much uncertainty globally with the administration, upcoming administration, whatever that's going to be. I
Mhm.
mean, people are just freaked out, right? And so you
Yeah.
have to recognize there's a certain number of people that are on the sidelines and they're not going to be swayed. And so
Mhm.
don't waste your time trying to pressure or sway them because one, it's not
Yeah.
going to work well for you in the long run. And two, it's not going to work well for you in the short run. So there's
Mhm.
literally no benefit. Just
Yeah.
nod, smile, say you respect and understand their position and carry on. The second important thing to understand is that there's still plenty of capital out there. There's no such thing
Mhm.
as every real estate investor has disappeared from the planet. Not at all. That cannot
Yeah.
be further from the truth.
Yeah.
So, I think that some of the key ways to kind of look at this point in time, and I think it also depends on, if you're an active investor or a passive investor. Candidly, I can completely appreciate passive
Mhm.
investors that are sitting on the sideline right now. That's
Yeah.
fine. But there are some others, and these are the ones you want to look for, right? That recognize, hey, we're buying basically at the bottom of the market right now, at least in
Yeah.
my opinion.
I think we
So,
are too. Yeah. I
yeah.
think we've hit the point where things are starting to go back up. At least I invest in Salt Lake City. The numbers in Salt Lake City have indicate that we're going back up now.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. So if you want to get in while it's low, this is the time that
mhm.
you actually want to do it. For those investors that recognize that and are moving on it, I think that they will look back, in hindsight and be very happy with these decisions. And
Mhm.
it's very cliche, but it's the famous statement by Warren Buffett, right? Be fearful when others rush in and be greedy when others are
Yeah.
fearful.
Mhm.
This is why. right?
Yeah.
This is why, because
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable, right? Learning to be uncomfortable and learning to get comfortable with being uncomfortable is an
Yeah.
absolute necessary part of becoming a real estate investor.
Yeah.
I struggled with it too. There was one time that, I got a sizable bonus and I
Mhm.
like just wanted to put it in my savings account because I liked how it made me feel,
Oh yeah.
it's like I like it there. But am I really not going to put that much money to work? Like
Mhm.
that's actually stupid. And
Yeah.
that's actually against my plan. It's against my goals. And so then I had like an aha moment when I was reading a book. I think it was called like The Secrets of the Millionaire Mindset, something like that.
Yeah, I've got that book. Is
Yeah,
it
great
the
book.
Harv Eker? There's two of them. There's one by Harv Eker and there's one by no, this isn't the Harv Eker book. This is anyway, go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll look it up after the
Yeah.
recording here and send it to you
Yeah.
if people want to know. But basically the author made such a powerhouse point, which is basically there's poor mindset and rich mindset, right? And
Mhm.
people hear about this, but I think until it really resonates with you, you just don't get it. So when
Yeah.
you're poor, you play defense. So you want to
Hmm.
put your money in the bank. You want to
Yeah.
bury it in the backyard. You want to do whatever because you're scared of the next step to move forward. You just
Hmm.
don't want to do it. You just want security. Well,
Yeah.
you can have that security, but you're not going to achieve significant financial growth while being in that mindset and just keeping the money because it's not going to make any money.
Yeah.
So you have to force yourself to learn to really go on the offense if you're serious about your financial goals. And it is
Yeah.
uncomfortable because you're scared.
Hmm.
But, the reality is that until you learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable, you're not going to achieve the type of goals that you probably have set for
Yeah.
yourself.
That is true. That is absolutely true. And I've seen, and I think that is T. Harv Eker that wrote that book. I did Google it, but yeah, it's something that I've seen. I grew up with kind of that scarcity mentality, the savings account type investments. I think that's what my parents do, and that's what they taught me. And so, it took me a little while to get out of that as well.
I don't think it's a bad thing, right? It's the foundation for being
Mhm.
able to have enough savings to get into
Yeah.
the game. So it's
Yeah.
good. It's just building on those foundational principles and adding in a more sophisticated next step.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, looking at the investments, I wholeheartedly agree. Everybody should have an emergency fund, and that's probably the first thing you should build up before you start investing. But even my emergency fund is sitting in a brokerage account. I mean,
Hmm.
but yeah, there's different levels, and I think building anything, doing anything worthwhile, you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone. You're going to have to learn, and you're going to have to keep on progressing. And there's just different levels. Some people get stuck at certain levels, and other people, can progress past it. But I definitely had my parents are really, really good at great things. Money wasn't one of them, but and
Hmm.
they'll tell you that. Yeah, I think I learned a little bit too much from them and had to break a lot of habits from them. But anyway,
For sure.
back
But,
up.
I think also to your point, and like this is one of the
Mhm.
reasons why it's great you're doing this podcast. This is one of the
Yeah,
reasons I'm glad we do our podcast because you just don't know what you don't know until you
yeah.
know. So like real estate investing, something I hear so many people say all the time is, I wish I had started sooner. I wish I had started sooner.
Hmm.
But they didn't even find out about it, like for real, find out about it until they were, much later. And
Yeah,
so, I think that that's part of the beauty of the efforts, that both you and I put into our day-to-day lives here of trying to kind of get the word out there and help people
yeah.
understand how does this all work and why in the world should you do it?
Mhm.
You just don't know what you don't know until you do.
Exactly. Awesome. Talking about, what's working right now. You said that there's definitely people with
Ah,
money, all that other stuff. Sorry,
yeah.
I took us on a tangent. I think a tangent to a
No.
tangent to the tangent. But
Yeah, no, that's all
yeah.
right. So, for if there's anybody out there right now that's raising money and having a hard time, I have
Mhm.
two words for you and it's lean in.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, if you look carefully at your network, if you look
Mhm.
carefully at your investor base, you know that there are still some people out there that are liquid. There are still some people out there that are
Mhm.
investing. And, so the best way to approach this is, one, obviously to nurture those relationships. very candidly. And, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and say, man, it's cold out there. I'm having a heck of a time
Yeah.
capital raising. Look at this deal. Help me out, man. Come
Mhm.
on. This one's great. So you lean into the investors that we're
Yeah.
still in the game. You
Mhm.
frankly, to be candid with you, you see if you can move a check from 250,000 to 500,000,
Yeah.
from 500,000 to 750,000, try to encourage, a little bit more investment
Yeah.
because times are more challenging, right? So that's one way. Another way to overcome that is to be more willing to split
Mhm.
the GP economics,
Yeah.
be willing to give more, and I've seen a lot of sponsors trying to do this. Some of them are trying to do it in a mass marketing effect, and I don't think it's working, to be honest with
Mhm.
you. But it's being very strategic and looking for additional partnerships that you can bring into play for very large check writers.
Yeah.
That is honestly the easiest way to go right now because when it comes to just syndicating, there's a lot of investors that want to be investing right now, but aren't
Mhm.
liquid because they just took, they just went through capital calls. They
Yeah.
haven't gotten distributions. They're just not liquid.
Yeah.
There are some that are just mad and are sitting on the sidelines or scared and sitting on the sidelines. And then there are those that are active. But in the
Yeah.
meantime, you basically have to take, it's kind of like that. I think everyone's heard about it. It's like a college professor that talks about time management or project
Mhm.
management or something, but it's like you get the glass jar, you drop in some big rocks
Yeah. Big. Yep.
first. And so,
Mhm.
you look for those bigger check writers, go out and get those bigger chunks
Yeah.
first. And you can do that. There's a ton of capital groups. Get on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. There's a ton of capital groups.
Yeah.
Start contacting those capital groups, start offering and asking, hey, how can we structure a deal to work together? How can we do a JV?
Mhm.
How can we set up a tick structure? How much can you raise? This is what I think we
Yeah.
can get. It's those bigger rocks. And
Mhm.
then you start to fill in the rest with the pebbles,
Yeah.
and that's how you're able to still raise. Are we having to work harder for it? Yeah. I mean, candidly, we are, and believe it or not, I'm super grateful when I see this right now. It's also referrals. It's
Yeah.
asking people for referrals, if they're not liquid right now, but they really do want to invest with you and they're happy with you as their
Mhm.
sponsor, ask them for a
Yeah.
referral. A lot of times I think we forget to ask for referrals. And so it's also another reason to really lean into your network is
Mhm.
even if your current network isn't necessarily investing, do they have people that they're comfortable to recommend to you? Great.
Mhm.
So lean in.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think that's just leaning into your investors. I think that's a good point. I mean, shows a little bit of action and you're the one that has to really make that connection. So you mentioned one thing, and there's a couple things in here that I just kind of want to take one step further. But you said, if some investors at 250, trying to get them up to 500. Do you guys do anything on your deal structure that incentivizes larger check writers, or is this more, conversational, just seeing if they can up their investment amount?
No, that's a great question. And yes, we do. So, sometimes the complexity of our deal structure, I think, can
Mhm.
look a little bit overwhelming to people. So,
Yeah.
especially being in investor relations, I try to make it really simple to understand. But essentially, we do. We have two tiers that are below $500,000, and we have
Mhm.
two tiers above
Okay.
500,000. And so, the tiers above 500,000, they get to share in the GP economics. So that's what I was talking about
Mhm.
earlier of, being creative and being
Yeah.
willing to share. I mean, give more of the money away, give people a bigger bang for their buck. And it does work. And then we actually have another class level above that I don't even put in our marketing materials. That's really for those much bigger check writers.
Yeah, and I did that for the first time in a deal that we just closed. We introduced a tier at 250, and looking back at it, I wish I would have put one more tier in there, but we had several people that have invested in previous deals at lower amounts that came in this one at 250, and it was the first time doing it. And for me, it was just kind of an experiment. But, I think I got more checks at that 250 mark on this deal than I ever had on any other single deal before. So
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely. It
yeah.
also opens the door to work with fund of funds.
Hmm.
And so,
Yeah.
a lot of people have started, they have a small enough network that does
Hmm.
like to invest that they don't want to go out and build a whole company, right? But they
Right.
do want to maybe start a fund and
Hmm.
just be a manager of that fund. So by creating these different structures, it also creates a way that the fund managers, will find it more attractive. They're getting a little bit better returns for
Yeah.
their investors in their fund. And so it motivates a lot of fund of funds to also join into our
Yeah.
deals.
Now, do you find yourself working with a lot of fund of funds right now?
Yeah, so we are working with some fund of funds. It's not a strategy that I utilize too much on our end. Our co-GP likes to use fund of funds a lot. I am open to it, but I also try to be very cautious about it just because, especially in this industry, reputation is everything.
Yeah.
And when you begin to align yourself, with a fund, you're also becoming associated with that fund or affiliated with that fund. So I feel like there's a little bit of a risk on a sponsor's part just to wheelie-neely, kind of partner up with funds. I think you have to be very careful and, really understand who these fund managers
Yeah.
are. Do they know how to do it correctly? Are they doing it right? Are they doing it legally? Factors like that. Our co-GP has kind of like her own mentoring program. So I feel like she's in a position where she can evaluate her funds much better than we would
Yeah.
because we don't have a mentoring program. So
Mhm.
that's why she tends to use that approach more than we do because we don't
Yeah.
have any type of mentoring program. I don't know, the relationship I develop with fund to funds is the good old
Yeah.
fashioned way, business development style. So yeah, it's kind of part of her secret sauce a little bit more than it is ours, but it is
Yeah.
yet another way to raise money.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I mean, with the fund of funds, I mean, speaking more to the audience now than you, Jeanette, but fund of funds can have several different structures. They can invest as LPs, they can invest as LPs with GP percentage, but there's lots of different ways they can get involved. So you have to have that all worked out and figured out before it starts.
It
But
is an interesting way for people that are wanting to get into the business to
Mhm.
find and actually create their
Yeah.
own niche in the business. So
Yep.
I do like the idea of it because, again, real estate just allows anyone and everyone of whatever background to have a shot, at getting into the industry.
Yeah, and I actually set up two fund of funds. For me, it was when I was leaving one company and not quite sure what I wanted to do next. And it turns out that for me, capital raising for other people wasn't my favorite thing. But
Mhm.
there's a lot of people who do really well at that and make a lot of money. And for those listening, if that's you, the fund of funds might be a good thing to research. But yeah. All right. So we're probably at the time where we need to start wrapping up right now. So, a couple of questions to finish off. Question one, what's next for you?
Ooh, well, hoping to see where we can take Blue Lake Capital and just, how far we can get. We've got some very big goals at the
Hmm.
company. We're kind of different, I think, from a lot of other sponsors because, most sponsors, I think, are very fine saying like a small company and just kind of
Hmm.
having like a small portfolio. I
Yeah.
think some of them are kind of more lifestyle clubs, and the real estate is like, in tandem to more of their lifestyle club goals and the things that they're doing. There's a lot of different ways that, sponsors operate. I think we're pretty unique in the fact that we're one of the few that is really looking to become a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is like when I first started, Ellie implemented all these processes. And I was like, Ellie, it's me and you. Like, we really don't need a process for this. Like, overkill, Ellie. But
Yeah.
it was a genius thing to do because
Mhm.
as we began to scale the team and as we began to hire, all of those processes were already established. So we didn't have
Exactly.
to go back and figure out now, oh, how do we do this? I mean, don't get me wrong, with growing pains, you eventually have to reassess your processes
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah.
But, for starters, it was good to grow on that way. And
Yeah.
so for me, I'm super excited to see, just how far we can get and just how far we can grow the company. So we're
Mhm.
about to close a deal in Dallas. So if anybody is into Dallas, we have a current deal there that I encourage you to check out on our website, which is bluelake-capital.com.
Mhm.
But ultimately, our goal is to try to grow the portfolio by another 500 million.
Yeah.
Uh, well, we're about to hit the $1 billion mark. So the B has
Oh,
been
that's
on,
awesome.
we're like just shy. I mean, I'm talking like 500,000. No, not even 500,000. I think we're at 957 million as far as our transaction
Just wait
volume.
a couple of months and you'll be over the
Yeah.
billion-dollar mark.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
just wait for
Exactly.
prices to go up that much. Now, when you say multi-billion, you're talking the value of real estate owned, or you're talking about, what your revenue is going to end up being?
No, we're talking about essentially,
Mhm.
looking at our portfolio, kind of
Yeah.
historically. So the value of the real estate, really.
Mhm.
So, ultimately our goal is to be a multi-billion-dollar company, transactionally. And so that's a huge goal. That's very different than a lot of other operators. And so we've scaled
Yeah.
out the team a lot. I've got a great team in place. I'm trying to come up right now with a strategy, to get us to that next level from a marketing standpoint and also from
Mhm.
an investor relations standpoint. So, we've got a lot of big goals and
Yeah.
it's exciting.
Yeah, my goal by the end of the decade is 7,500 units in Salt Lake, and
Nice.
we were with a new team member at our quarterly meeting, and she pulled out her phone and was doing some math, and she looked at me and she's like, Brian, that's $2 billion worth of real estate. I'm like, I know.
Hmm. Yep.
I
It's so
know it
interesting.
is.
It's so
Yeah.
interesting too, because I think, and it's something that I actually did learn from Ellie,
Hmm.
that I'm grateful for, is
Yeah.
for some reason, sometimes we're afraid to share the audacity of our goals. We're
Hmm.
afraid to
Yeah.
actually even admit them to ourselves sometimes. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
and some people don't have audacious goals, and that's totally fine. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But like I told you at the beginning of this podcast, I have some big challenges in front of me. I need some big solutions.
Yeah.
This is a big solution, right? And
Yeah.
it puts it actually within reach. Realistically, there's no way that I would accomplish this goal with a W-2, right? For my family. I
Yeah.
wouldn't, you know what I mean? And so real estate really is one of the few avenues that can really create a tangible, real, possible way to accomplish big, hard goals.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And one thing, I think this is a quote I'm stealing from Brandon Turner. He said that if you have a problem that can be solved with money, you don't have a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, so, and there's a lot of problems in this world, big problems, you have a lot of money, most of those problems go away, so
Well, and that's the ironic thing, right? Like no amount of money is going to, cure
yeah,
my daughter's incurable diseases,
yeah.
but can it at least keep her very comfortable as she has to figure
Mhm.
her way out through it all? Yes. And is that
But it's going
valuable
to
enough
pay
to
for
me?
medications. It's going to pay
Yep.
for, doctor's visits. The best health care you can provide.
Yes. And
Yeah.
quality of life,
Mhm.
literally there's no real value that we can attach to the quality of
Yeah.
life. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. All right. Next to last question. If you had to give advice to somebody who's just starting out in this business, what would it be?
Ask hard questions,
Yeah.
ask hard questions. I get to talk to a lot of either potential investors or even our current investors. And a word of caution, there are a lot of sharks in the industry too,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And that
Yeah.
was one of the reasons why, in the beginning of the show, I said I hated real estate. I had a very negative association with real estate. I thought it was like icky and sticky. And there are some people like that. So you do want to be very cautious about who you are investing with. And one of the best ways to protect yourself is to ask hard questions. Because if you find somebody trying to give you BS answers, if you find people trying to avoid
Mhm.
answering your question directly, that's a huge concern. Ask them to speak to current investors, ask them for references of current investors. I
Mhm.
guarantee you there's a ton of sponsors out there that'll, oh, privacy, we don't release that. Oh, that's because they either don't have good things to say or they really barely have any investors at all. It's a huge red flag. So to me, if a sponsor won't openly let you actually speak with one or two of their other current investors, there's a major red flag. Just walk away. I won't even
Yeah.
get into it.
To that last point, with the investors, people ask me for investor referrals all the time. I am not going to give you a phone number for an investor. That there is privacy considerations in there, but what can I do? I can pick up the phone, call one of my investors and say, "Are you willing to talk to so and so? Can I give your number out?"
Exactly.
That's the difference there. I mean, there are privacy concerns,
Yeah.
but those are easy, 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 easy to get around,
A
So,
100%. To me, I really do love and believe very much in
mhm.
wild and radical transparency
Yeah,
because I know that there's a lot of other people that are just won't do that. They're
mhm.
just uncomfortable with it. And it really does help qualify what's legit and what's not much faster when you
Yeah,
remove all BS aspects of things. Like you said, I did contact a handful of investors. I have their permission in advance to share their contact information as
good.
referrals. So, my first advice is just ask very hard questions.
Yeah,
I
I
even
love
talk
it.
with investors sometimes that ask me, what should I have asked? And I'm like, man, you didn't ask me this or this. You need to be asking these questions.
Yeah,
So ask hard questions, be cautious in choosing who you invest with. It's not uncommon at all for a potential investor to watch us for
yeah,
like a year and a half, 2 years before they invest with us. That
hmm
is smart.
yeah,
So don't rush into anything. Make sure you take your time to really do your homework and assess things and then ask for referrals.
yeah.
Absolutely. You trust your network, ask around your network.
Love it, love it. All right, last question. How can listeners learn more about you?
Oh, well, it's so interesting because Blue Lake, is Ellie Perlman everything, but I guess I have to admit, because I've been with the company for so long and because I do have my
Yeah.
hands in so many cookie jars, part of me feels like a lot of it is actually also me. So take a look at the company website. It's bluelake-capital.com.
Mhm.
Also, I'm, definitely on LinkedIn. I don't post very often myself, actually, on
Mhm.
LinkedIn because I'm too busy with everything else that I do, but I do check my messages regularly. So I'm Jeanette Robinson is in parentheses Friedrich on LinkedIn.
All right. And we'll put a link to the website. We'll put a link to your profile. And my editor is going to, anything you said earlier on, we'll put links to in there as well. So for those listening, you want to get in touch with her, learn more about her, hear about that, or see that Dallas deal that she talked about, check the show notes for links to take you there. So, all right. Well, hey, Jeanette, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Very much appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. I appreciate your time and your listeners' time. So thanks, people.